Hello, everybody, and welcome to Profiling Evil Podcasts. Today, I'm talking with Nicole Lowe McBride, an author and an accomplished attorney. Nicole rose above the feelings of loss and despair as a teenager who dropped out of school, got involved in illegal drugs, and faced life alone on the streets, homeless and exploited. Nicole, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's our privilege. And I'm joined by my longtime friend, retired Assistant Police Chief Marcy Korginski. Marcy's a familiar face here on Profiling Evil. And our listeners seem to ask for her regularly. So I'm really glad she was able to come back and join us today. You know, she actually brought your story to me, Nicole, after reading your book, Never Let Me Go, a memoir. I'm so glad that, Marcy, you were able to also work this into your schedule. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. My pleasure, Mike.
Well, hey, let's dig into this fascinating story. Nicole, you were, I'm going to take you back in time a little bit here. You were a 13-year-old runaway who left home and joined a Gothic cult on the streets of Salt Lake City, Utah. Can you just take us back to that point in your life and describe what was going on at home and why you chose to run away even in the first place?
So I think a lot of it was just feeling like I didn't matter and that nobody cared. I'm an overachiever. So I tend to go full bore into things. It's go big or go home for me. And it always has been. And so when I was trying so hard and not getting what I needed, I just was like, why do this? You know, why try so hard? Why get straight A's? Why, be this perfect, what I thought was a perfect child, when it wasn't getting me much. And my older brother, who struggled a lot in school and just in general. And so he got a lot of attention out of necessity, right? I mean, that happens in families, and nothing against my parents or anything. He needed more attention than I did because I was on track. I was doing the things I needed to do. But that for me led to me just falling down this hole where I decided that it wasn't worth it and that I wasn't worth it. And I just left. And so my brother was actually the one who kind of pulled me out into it in a lot of ways because he was already involved in the Gothic community. And so we were best friends growing up, my brother and I. And so when he went, I kind of got pulled into the same ring of friends and just went down that path right along with him. And he started running away first. And it was devastating when he ran away. I remember watching my mom deal with that, and it was heartbreaking. And yet I did it too. And I knew what pain I was causing her. And I think that sticks with me quite a bit as a parent now, and just knowing how I would feel about it. But yeah, that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, and as a parent today, having hindsight, where could your parents have provided more support? Could they have even prevented what happened? I mean, what was the dynamic that was going on that kind of made you kids feel kind of like you were out there alone?
So my mom worked 2 jobs. So she worked all day, and then she would come home, she'd make dinner, and then she would go to her next job. And so I didn't see her a lot. And then on the weekends, she had to get everything else done. So all the cooking and the cleaning and all of those things. So I just didn't get a lot of like one-on-one attention from my mom. I think that would have made probably a big difference. And my dad, he was a pilot, and so he was on call. He was an air med pilot. And so he was on call, and he was at the hangar a lot. He had weird hours. And he hung out with his friends, he went golfing. And when he was home, he was just kind of, he didn't interact with us very much. He watched a lot of golf on TV and things like that. But he just didn't interact a whole lot with me and my brother. And he and my brother just they have very different views even today. And so he really struggled with dealing with my brother and my brother's issues and trying to understand them, and help my brother. He just didn't know what to do, which caused my mom to be very protective of my brother. And I was just always trying to make everybody happy and not cause a ruckus or anything like that. And so I think my dad just he focused a lot of his attention on my younger sister, and they did a lot of things together because she was cute and little and easy.
Nicole, if your brother hadn't gone down that path initially, do you think you would have?
Yes, I think I would have found maybe not that group, but I was already headed that direction. Like I had already found friends who were using alcohol and marijuana and those types of things. And so I was already involved in that kind of a group that, and skipping school and those things. And he's the one that pulled me into the Gothic world. So I actually pulled him into that friend group where it was much more, there's like borderline gang stuff going on. And then I pulled him in there, and then he got involved with the Gothics, which is much more his style. And so then I went that direction with him. So yeah, I think I would have ended up down a bad path either way.
Yeah, for those who may not understand Gothic, I remember when it first started emerging. I mean, kids walking around all in black, and and it's been so interesting to see how people confuse it with devil worshippers, and I
Mhm.
mean, this whole thing with the occult. Why don't you help people understand what that movement is kind of all about, and what the philosophy or mindset is of folks that are getting involved in Gothic behaviors?
So I can only speak to like what was going on in Salt Lake at that point in time. I don't know how it's evolved now. I think they're much more, I don't know, emo now is what they call it. But it's very much a almost like a supernatural feel, like you are drawn to um, something outside of this world. Like this world is just not enough and not giving you what you need. So you kind of make it up in another world. And at that time, supernatural things were very cool. And I think that that's kind of why it gravitated towards that direction. But as far as like the clothes and stuff, I think it's mostly to repel people. It's to disappear, and it's to make people not come towards you, because you don't want that interaction because you've been rejected, and it's safer to put up a wall and push people away than to bring them in and be rejected by them again. So I think that's, at least for me, that was a big piece of just the all black, just the menacing appearance, that vampire look, the creepy kid. So, and that to me is the logic behind the dress.
Well, and I think you said something really important. I want you to maybe think of and comment on this, Marcy, with all the years you spent in youth bureau, for instance, this point where kids really don't want to be noticed and they want to withdraw. And is there something we can do to keep them closer to the light than that withdrawing process?
Well, honestly, as she's been talking, I wish I would have had this type of insight when I was the gang detective and the gang sergeant and the gang lieutenant, because when we saw those kids, we did think that there was some devil worship aspect to it. We really didn't understand or have good enough knowledge about these goth kids. And frankly, it was hard to comprehend why someone would want to dress that way and do that to themselves and appear that way. So it's so nice to have the insight from your perspective, Nicole. I wish that maybe you could even somehow connect with law enforcement today, because I'm sure a lot of the children that are out there, however they're dressing, come from a similar perspective. So I'm already being enlightened by what you've been saying, and I wish I would have known more of this in those days when we would see all the goth kids everywhere?
I've spoken at the Children's Justice Center Symposium a couple of times. And so I've reached out a little bit, and that's kind of with the whole COVID thing has kind of backed off. I was supposed to do a speech with the AG's conference, the Attorney General's conference, and that's right when COVID hit. And so it's just never been set back up. So I do try. I wish I had more contacts to reach out to them, because I do think that sometimes it only takes one person to really make a difference. And you don't know when it happens. And it can be a brief moment. And it's just like something that you recognize that child is a human being. And you can do this with adults who are on the streets too. You stop and you make eye contact, and it's like, I recognize you as a human being worth something. And it's that connection that sticks with the child or with another person. And it might not be that day that they remember it, but it comes back. It comes back, and you just don't know. So I think that it's important for everyone to know that if you just take a second.
Can I ask you a question in regard to that? So, as a police officer and I've had a lot of interaction with kids on the street and that kind of thing, and you being one of those children, had you have responded to me in a positive way if I had tried to reach you? Because I've tried to reach a lot of children, and when they're in that mindset, they're not very receptive to. They don't appear to be very receptive to a police officer's interest in them.
They're not. But that's why I say you don't know when it's going to happen, right? Because you can say something one day to that child, and then a month from them, they're like, you know what? For whatever reason, it clicks in their head that somebody cared. And they will interact with you in a negative way. They're just going to. They interact. It doesn't matter who you are. If they see you as an authority figure or somebody who wants to take control of who they are and what they stand for, they're going to push back. It's second nature to them. And so I think that you have to just keep doing it. You just have to keep reaching out and saying, you know what? I care about you. I worry when you're out here. Can we get you to a safe place?
Hey, folks, we're talking with Nicole Lowe McBride, an author and an accomplished attorney who also is an individual who lived on the streets as a teenager. I'm joined by my friend, Assistant Chief Marcy Korginski, in this interview. And Nicole, I want to take you back to this 13-year-old that you were as you were leaving home and living on the streets. I mean, it had to be terrifying, even though you were rebelling and having what felt like control in your life. It had to be terrifying at times to be out on the street and trying to pull this off. Talk about what it was like on the street at 13, what the ramifications of being on the street at 13 were like, and how it kind of led you over to San Franscico and then to bigger changes in your life.
So I think I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing about being a teenager is you don't always recognize risk, right? So that gets them to do cool things, like, jump off of buildings and do flips and off walls and stuff like that. But it also makes it so they just don't see a risk where there is one all the time, and they're invincible. That's not going to happen to me. And so I think that mentality it's how they function in the world. And so they take risks, and I took a lot of risks. I didn't understand the risks that I was taking, and I put myself in really bad positions. And I don't know that I had a full grasp of what could have happened to me until I was much older and looking back on it. And I just went, oh my gosh. When I read through all my diaries from that time and what was happening and how I was thinking, it was terrifying the way that I thought about the world and the situation, because it was still like, oh, everything's going to be fine. This is great. This is fun. And it's not at all. And so when I first left and I was on the streets, I got involved with the Goths and hung out with them. And there's groups, and there's adults in these groups, and some of them are protectors and some of them are predators. And so you run into both, and you don't really know the difference. I mean, there's adults out there that are trying to look out for the kids, but they're also involved in this weird community too. And so they try to do the best that they can. And it's like harm reduction, I think, because they know they can't get the kids out of the situation. So they try to kind of minimize the risk that the kid is in. Not that it's necessarily a good situation, but I think that their heart is in the right place, and they just don't know what to do when they see kids out there, especially young kids. Like there was 8 and 11-year-olds out there too. And but these adults were like the mom of the little group that we were in. And so mom would take care of people, and mom would make sure that we had a safe place to stay that night. She would check in, and say, hey, you need to go. Like when I was totally intoxicated and just drunk out of my mind and puking everywhere on State Street or Main Street in front of Crossroads Mall. And she's the one that said, you know what, you need to go, you need to get off the street, you need to go with this person who she perceived as a safe person. And ultimately he was mostly safe for me. And so I went with him and went to his house. And even though he was a heroin addict, I mean, that's not a safe person. It's not somebody you would send your child with, right? Especially a child who's completely inebriated. And so, but I went with him and nothing happened. And he did just put me to bed, and gave me a place to shower, somewhere to sleep, and I was safe. And he gave me, I kept my clothes there. I kept other personal items at his house, and they were safe there. They didn't get stolen. They weren't rifled through. It was always somewhere that I could go, that I had some form of safety. And so I got involved more, and he wasn't really in the goth culture. He was kind of more in the punk, when the punks and the goths kind of collide. But I got more and more involved in the goth culture, and just you would almost say a spirituality of it. And that's where you get that everybody's saying there's devil worshipers and stuff like that. And nobody's worshiping the devil. I mean, I won't say nobody does, because people do, right? And I'm sure among the goth community, there was people that were into much darker things than what I was into and what the people I hung out with were into. But there was a lot of tarot card reading and Ouija board kind of stuff, and burning sage and Wiccan witchcraft kind of things. And those things were definitely going on, and trying to, our big thing was, we wanted to merge two worlds together. So this fantasy world that we thought we existed in some way, and reality that we were actually in. And so we were somehow trying to magically do that. And so that's kind of the extent of the devil worshiping part of it, is we would, light candles, burn incense and things like that, and stay up all night and sit at a graveyard or in Memory Grove around the little altar up there, and things like that.
So I got to ask, did you go to Emo's grave?
I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
For those in Salt Lake, that's big deal, Marcy. Big deal.
Yes.
I don't have any. I've never heard of Emo's grave, so I don't even know what that is.
Well, in the Ogden Cemetery, we just drove around the soldier, right? And the soldier turned his head around in circles while you drove around. So there are all kinds of crazy things. Well, Nicole, things did get worse, though. You then got introduced into narcotics. You were getting involved in sexual activity that was not productive. I'll let you kind of go through that.
So from there, I started using LSD. That was my substance of choice. I didn't get into any of the methamphetamine use or anything that was going on around me. There was a lot of heroin. There was a lot of methamphetamine, some PCP every once in a while. But my drug of choice was LSD. And so I would use that, and then I would also drink alcohol quite a bit. At least initially, I stopped using alcohol pretty early on, and I never really liked marijuana either. So LSD was the thing for me. And I got one night I went to a club, to Confetti's. That was the big Gothic club in Salt Lake, and I didn't really have anywhere to stay that night, and so I left with a couple of friends, and some guy that we had just met that night at the club, and he said, "Oh, I have a place to stay." And so he took us to an old paint warehouse, which was closed down on 2100 South and 3rd West. It's no longer there. The building's gone now. And so he's like, "Well, this is where I'm staying." And so we all stayed there, and I hung out with this person for a couple days afterwards, and I continued to stay at the paint warehouse, and we got really intoxicated, and he ended up raping me, and I threw up all over the place, and he just continued his thing. And the next morning, he had gone out to get food, and I was wise enough to get up and leave. And I was a mess. I had vomit in my hair. My makeup was a total wreck. I mean, as you can imagine, because I painted my face pretty white, and then black lipstick, heavy black eyeliner. And so after something like that, your makeup's just a wreck. And so I left, and I went to the gas station across the street. And at the gas station, the person working there was actually the father of a girl I had ridden to school with. His wife was like a carpool person for a few girls in the young women's group for the LDS church. And so I had ridden to school with his daughter, and I recognized him. I doubt he recognized me. There's just no way. I looked so different. But he didn't. He just gave me the bathroom key, and I went in the bathroom and I cleaned myself up as best as I could. And then I caught the bus, and I went back to my Gothic community, and I got pulled in even more, because one of the things that was pretty prevalent among the Gothic community was vampires and werewolves. And so it's kind of like gangs in a way. I guess that's the best thing that I can equate it to. And so there were people, and I don't even know if everybody understood how they were being classified besides our small group. I'm not sure that the werewolves knew that they were being called werewolves and had been classified as that, but in our heads, they somehow knew. And I think how I got pulled into this world and started believing all of these things was because I wanted so desperately to be somebody, to be something, to be important. And there I was. And people wanted to protect me. And so I got pulled even closer into this group, and there was like a dominant couple in the group, and they were like, everybody referred to them. They were like the head of this little Gothic family that we had. And so they essentially, when we were in trouble or when something happened we didn't like, we went to them. And what happened was that they essentially gave me to an adult male, and he was like a protector of the group. And so they handed me over to him and said, "She's yours. You take care of her, you protect her, you do what you will with her." And he was over 18 and I was 14. And he physically assaulted me, sexually assaulted me. And I finally got away from him because another kid came down to Salt Lake. He had run away from home, and he came down to Salt Lake looking for his brother who was in Job Corps. And so he came down here, and he happened to be hanging out in the same area where we hung out. And he was totally different from everybody else. He was a hippie, he had long hair and just had that total hippie vibe, tie-dye t-shirt, ripped up jeans. And he took an interest in me. And whenever anybody took an interest in me, I became like interested in them, right? Because I wanted, at least in this community, if they were outside the community, then I didn't want anything to do with them. But he said, that he could get us some really good LSD. And so I started hanging out with him, and he did get really good LSD. And I ended up getting my boyfriend, the adult male at the time, to agree to using LSD with us. And he didn't normally use LSD. He was on cocaine and methamphetamine and stuff like that. And so he agreed to do it with me and this other person. And so I knew I had been on LSD enough times that I knew that once I came down, that I would be kind of really restless, and it's really difficult to first fall asleep, even though you're exhausted and you just want your brain to shut down. It won't. It's still kind of running 100 miles an hour. And so I knew that, and he kind of just crashed. I don't know why. I don't know if it was because he was much bigger than me, so his body metabolized the LSD differently, but I was able to stay awake. And once he passed out, I knew he'd crash hard, because you always do. And once he was asleep, then I snuck out with this hippie kid, and we ran off together, and we found his brother and a couple of other hippie friends. And we went down, we took the bus as far south as we could go, which was Provo. And we stole a car in Provo, and we drove to San Francisco, essentially. We made a couple stops here and there, but we ended up in San Francisco. And they were following the Grateful Dead, and I was like, okay, whatever.
I mean, Marcy, we always looked at these kids that were stealing cars and everything else as crooks, and you get to know the personalities and know what's going on in their goofy little minds. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'm just amazed that you survived all of that. When I read your book, I could see the trap you were in, and I'm just astounded that you're here today to talk to us, and that you survived some harrowing times. To me, it's just incredible. And you're right, Mike, because it's a little bit of an us versus them situation, and when you're on one side, it's very difficult to see the other side. And just talking to you today, it's just, you were such a willing victim in a way. You weren't willing to be in some of those situations, but you were willing to be out there. And the whole time you were essentially victimized and maybe were ignorant to that you were being victimized so much. I'm not sure. I think you on some level, but on another level, you felt like you were free also. And so it's really hard to comprehend that mindset. So I really appreciate that you're telling us. It helps me to comprehend it a little more.
It makes me wish I could go back and
that's right,
and rework with those kids that I took too hard a line on.
Well, and I did try to reach out to kids sometimes, and some kids would say, yeah, but some kids were not receptive, and some kids were very receptive. But at the end of the day, I never knew if anything I did ever made a difference, because you just keep trying and trying. And I remember seeing a young man on heroin. He was probably 16 or 17. He was a very handsome boy coming from appeared to be a very nice family. I mean, he just seemed like he was just a person who could have really gone somewhere in the world, and he was on heroin. And I tried so hard to talk to him, and he cried, and he said, I know. And I never did see him again, but you just don't know what happens after your interaction with them, really, as much as you try. Because I did try, but I didn't ever really comprehend your side, Nicole, that side.
It's hard. It's hard to reach kids like that. And you just have to or kids like I was, you just have to keep trying. And like one day it might not make a difference, but the next day it might make a difference because of, depending on the clothes you're in, I mean, if you're in police officer clothes, you're already at a disadvantage for reaching these kids in a lot of ways. because you're kind of the enemy in a lot of ways, because you can take them back home. You can, you can take them to youth services or wherever, and they don't want that. They want control of their life. They want to feel like they have meaning, that they have some type of control. I would say that if you looked deeply at these kids in their core, there is like a self-loathing in a lot of them, and also just a lack of control. Like they feel like they don't have control of their lives, and they're trying to exert control in some way. And sometimes that's with your feet, and walking out the door. And that's the only way you have control. For some kids, it's eating disorders, and it's different for all of them. But I would say that is a big piece, is just feeling out of control and like they don't matter.
In your book, you talked about you plan to sell acid, to obtain acid and sell acid in order to travel to another place. And when I'm reading the book, I can see how fantastic the idea is, and yet you fantastic in, could this really be something that could happen? But you really believed that you could sell enough acid to make your plans happen. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think that's sometimes like the delusional thinking of being a kid in a lot of ways. Like so I ended up staying with this little hippie kid, and we stayed together, and he ultimately is the father of my oldest child. And so we always thought, we'd buy a little bit of acid and then we'd sell it and we'd get more money than what we bought it for. And so we just keep buying more and more acid. And then ultimately we were going to, run away and get to Europe is where we were going to go. How two kids who need passports and parents were going to get to Europe, I have no idea. But that didn't even occur to us. Like it didn't matter. We were going to make it happen one way or another. And so, yeah, that was the plan. And it never worked out because the acid always got taken, and you just can't deal the stuff you use. And I'd be surprised. I'm sure some people can. We could not. We just used it more and more, and couldn't sell enough to get the amount that we needed to be able to fund our awesome trip.
Folks, we're talking with Nicole Lowe McBride, and her story is compelling, as you may have guessed if you're just tuning in. Nicole, you told me that when you first held your son, it changed your life. And it was at that point that you started to reclaim that person that was deep inside. It gave you determination to go to school, to get a diploma and see what life had to offer. Talk a little bit about that aha moment, and if you had any idea the big mountain you were preparing to climb.
I had no idea. I had done some babysitting when I was, 12, and maybe a little bit when I was 13 before I went and totally lost my mind. But I didn't do a lot. And so I didn't know what it took to take care of a baby. And when I found out I was pregnant, my plan was to continue on the hippie life. We were going to buy a VW bus, and we were going to raise our would-be hippie child out of the bus and homeschool him, and just continue to follow the Grateful Dead or whatever band was big in the hippie community, and go to rainbow gatherings and do all of those things. And he would just come along, and he would be the little, barefooted, long-haired kid. And so that was the plan. And when I actually had him and held him for the first time, and he looked up at me, and his hands were so tiny, and they do that little thing where they grab your finger. I couldn't take him out there. He was so small and so vulnerable. And I knew what it was like on the streets. I knew what it was like to be hungry and to be cold, and to not know where things were going to go, and not know where you were going to be, and not know where you were going to sleep. And I didn't want that for him. I didn't want him to have to ever worry about if he was going to be fed, or how long it would take for him to beg for enough money to be fed. I didn't want him to do that. And so I decided then and there that he wasn't going to be that. He was not going to go down that path, and I was not going to take him that way. And so I said to myself, you're going to be a mom now, and you're going to be the best mom that you can possibly be to this little boy.
Folks, we're going to get back to talking with Nicole Lowe McBride and my co-host, retired Assistant Chief Marcy Korginski, in a couple of minutes. But I want to invite you to take a moment, go to Amazon and buy Nicole's book, Never Let Me Go, a memoir. Again, you can find it at Amazon, and you don't want to miss out on getting this book. And I hope you don't mind, Nicole, but since we're talking books, I want to please invite everyone to also consider picking up my 2 latest books, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, and She Knew No Fear. You can get signed copies through profilingevil.com. And hey, with the holidays approaching, they're going to make great gift ideas, so please consider it. But let's get back to Nicole Lowe McBride, an author and an accomplished attorney who I think rose above childhood difficulty on the streets. So, Nicole, what's your relationship with your parents like now?
So my relationship with my parents is actually really good, for the most part. My mom actually comes to my home once a week and watches my little girl on Thursdays. And she is an amazing grandma. And once she found out I was pregnant, which was 6 months into my pregnancy, she was right there. Like, it didn't matter what had happened before. It had all been washed away. And my mom is like the epitome of love, and it's an unconditional love for her children. And so when she knew I needed help and that I was bringing in more life into the world, she was right there. She went to every one of my doctor's appointments. She bought my son everything he needed, his car seat, his crib, we had everything we needed because of her. And my dad, when he first found out, he was not pleased, to say the least. He kind of disowned me, and he said he didn't really want anything to do with my son. And then he was there when my son was born. So even though he said that, he was there when he was born, and they were best buddies. They used to, because eventually we moved in with my parents when my son's father decided he wanted to be a kid still, and left. And so we moved in with my parents, and they completely welcomed us. And I went to school, and they helped me take care of my son. And my dad and my son were best buddies, and he's a great grandpa. He's not always the best dad, but he's an amazing grandpa. So my relationship with my parents is good.
Talk about a reversal of life for you. I mean, you were living on the street, making all kinds of goofy choices, and all of a sudden you said, this isn't what my son and what you deserve. You went back to high school with little high school. You dropped out of high school, but you went back and you got your high school diploma. Then you went on to college and got a bachelor's degree, or at least a 4-year degree, and then went on to law school. I mean, Marcy, we've seen this story played out 1,000 times, but we've not seen this end of the story like we've seen with Nicole.
Definitely, Nicole, from begging spare change on the streets and trying to figure out where begging spare change on the streets and trying to figure out where hours in coffee shops eating cheese fries to becoming this wonderful attorney as an advocate for children. It's amazing where you are today, and to me it seems like you're in the exact right place because you've experienced all these things to now be an attorney that helps children. Your understanding of what they can go through, I think, is the people that work with you have to be very lucky to be in that, have you on their side as their advocate. And a lot of the people that Mike and I are talking about, and that you've seen too, most of those people don't have the success you're having. So you must have had something inside you to get you to this point. Even a lot of children women who have children, people who have children, don't succeed like you have. I wonder what the difference is with you and them.
That is a really good question, and one that I frequently get, and one that I've asked myself many, many times and explored on many, many runs. And I think some of it just comes down to I am so determined. And when I go after something, I go after it. And that can sometimes be to my detriment. And because I'll get myself into the situation that I got into when I was a kid, I just went full force into it, jumped with both feet. And sometimes that's to my benefit. I represent parents in child welfare right now. That's my job and where my practice is. And I frequently sit with clients who are in a very similar situation as what I was in. And I don't know, you have to be in the right place to be able to accept help. I know that much is true. And getting to that place is different for everybody. That breaking point is different for everyone, and you can't force it on anybody. I've watched hundreds of people lose their parental rights to their children because they didn't find their why. And I think that's what it is. You have to find your why. Why do you want to succeed? Why do you value yourself? And initially, I didn't value myself for myself. I valued myself through my son. And for whatever reason, some people just can't get there in the time frame that we want them to. And ultimately, some never do. And I'm not exactly sure what that is. I know it's different for everybody. And that's why we can't just, it's not, one size fits all. We can't make it happen for people. We see people come through the court system, both criminal and juvenile court, and some of them just take off and they're like, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of the services that I'm receiving, the drug treatment and whatever mental health treatment, and I'm going to fly. And other people just, they won't get on board. They won't do it. And I don't know if it's just like an emotional history, some of it, of course. And I think it's like I said, it's different for everybody. And if they can't find their why, and we can't help them find their why, then they don't fly.
That is so profound. Nicole, I've asked this question to a lot of people, and I almost always get the same answer. Would you change anything that's happened in your life?
I wouldn't.
Isn't that something? Same answer. Yeah. I get from everyone, because it's what made you become the fabric you are. For you, why wouldn't you change?
It's because it's made me who I am today. It's given me the insight and the ability to help other people, which is ultimately why I do what I do. Working in child welfare, not fun. It's hard. It's emotionally draining every single day. You see horrific things, as you guys know, being in law enforcement. You see the worst of the worst situations. And if I can make the difference for one person, if I can help one person find their why, it's all of it's worth it. Every moment of it.
That's fantastic. So, Marcy, you undoubtedly have questions, but Nicole, why did you write the book?
For that reason. I wanted people to have a resource. I saw so many parents that would come into court with these teenagers, because part of juvenile court is also the delinquency side, so the juvenile criminal court. And I saw so many parents that are just at their wits' end with their kids, that they're turning them over to the state, to their custody and guardianship over to the state, because they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help my kid. And the one thing that I always wanted them to know is that kids can come out of this, and there's always hope. And you always have to leave that door open. You don't want them to take advantage of you, right? Because there's always that careful balance, because you always hear about the kids who then, completely take advantage of parents, and their parents are enabling, and they just kind of continue this cycle with their child. But I saw so many parents just give up that I wanted them to know that it's possible for their child to come out and well, and to be successful, that all is not lost. And then on the other side, for kids and for adults who had been through horrible things, I wanted them to know that it's possible to achieve something and to be someone. And it's hard, but it's definitely.
Nicole, the way you juxtaposed your story with the story of the woman who ultimately loses her children in your book was very interesting and heartbreaking as well. And so what gave you the idea to write your book in that way? I do think it added another layer and some depth to your book that was very interesting.
I think I thought of it when I was sitting in the courtroom and I looked over the way juvenile courtrooms are set up. So you have you have more tables, right? In a criminal court, which is most people are familiar with, you have 2 tables. You have defense and prosecution. In the juvenile court, you have 3 tables, and each parent has their own attorney. So you could really they're all squished at one table, but they're the defense, right? And then you have the state, and then you have the children and the children's attorney. So you have at least 3 parties in the juvenile court. And I was sitting there at the state's table, and I was looking over at the parents' table, and I just was like, that could have been me. So easily that could have been me. And if I wouldn't have had the support of my family to jump in and help me, then it probably would have been me. And and even in delinquency cases, when I would sit and watch the kids go through those hearings, and are charged with drugs and whatever else, stealing cars and, burglarizing things and violent offenses. And I also, again, that could have been me. In so many situations, we barely skated by and didn't get caught by police. And I don't know if it would have been better or worse if we would have gotten caught. When I was a kid, I think I would have just done what I needed to do and gone back out there, like so many of our youth do. But that's really what gave me the idea of putting both stories in there together and moving back and forth between them, because their story could have been my story.
Folks, you are not going to want to miss getting this book, and I hope that you'll jump right on the link below and order it as quickly as possible. I want to thank Nicole Lowe McBride for taking time to visit today. And to my dear friend, Marcy Korginski, thanks for joining. Again, don't forget to check out Nicole's book. And if you are watching Profiling Evil's choir practice, Nicole's going to be on and actually giving away a couple of copies that are signed to a couple of really lucky winners. So we're looking forward to that coming. To both of you, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone out there for supporting Profiling Evil. Remember, you can find us on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and any of your favorite podcast platforms. I hope that you'll consider subscribing to it. And folks, we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.